of short announcements. Today there is a talk at 5, public talk on Govind Swaroop's lives and work. We will have a very short discussion session towards the end of the day, which will only be for 15 minutes. So we request all the speakers of this session and the next session to please keep track of time. So let's start with our session, and the session chair is Prabhabati Chingangam from IAA. So Prabha, you can.
Okay, so let's begin. We have 4 talks in this session of 20 minutes each, 15 plus 5. So to the speaker, since the talk is very short, I will just, after 15 minutes, I will say that your time is up. I will not interrupt. So Desh, please start. Hello?
Yeah, sorry, I was just waiting to be unmuted. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
So thanks, Prabha, and thanks to the organizers to give an opportunity to a novice to share some thoughts, and I will keep to time. Okay, so I'm going to talk about something that you are already familiar with in terms of background. Many people have already said things about this, about the global signal. While most of the talks earlier concentrated on the statistical signature, we will look at closely what the global signal should look like to an observer. And this is essentially understood as a distortion of the CMB spectrum. A lot of work has been done on this. People have computed what the expected distortion should be based on certain assumptions, of course, and which will get checked when the actual observation tells us what the reality is. So this is the frequency range over which essentially low frequency range, higher redshift range, essentially, where post dark ages, when the first galaxies form, you would have heating and then reionization and completion of reionization. And this is expected to lead to a profile as shown here. I will say only a little bit about some of the details. So we are talking of very early epochs here. And so the differential brightness temperature with respect to the background temperature at different redshifts depends on how the H1 fraction and the spin temperature evolves during time. And simple radiative transfer considerations will lead you to this with appropriate accounting of where the signal is coming from and so on. So what you have is essentially this is showing the spin temperature evolution, which is essentially this solid line profile, which takes the values of either the background temperature or the kinetic temperature based on the processes involved, and everything is finally modulated by the amount of the H1 fraction. And so this is the sort of qualitative result. This is shown the other way, where its x-axis is the redshift. There are various dependencies, as would be expected, on the ingredients dictating this distortion, and prominent among those are the X-ray flux and the Lyman alpha flux. And this just shows the level of variation you would see based on the values of these parameters. You can see that a wide range of this second feature, its manifestation is apparent from this. So one can believe that when one actually has the measurement, one will be able to say something about these. There are also various other considerations people have tried to include or consider where there is exotic energy injection before first stars are switched on. I'm not going to go into any details except to again show, draw your attention to the level of variation you would see in this global signature. The relative importance of these different processes and their sequences is understandably uncertain, and what one is waiting for is a reliable measurement of the spectral profile, which will reveal all these details. So to help people interpret their observations, there has been an atlas by Cohen et al., where a large number of templates have been generated for different combinations of these parameters we just talked about. And people often try to see what best matches their observations in whatever range of frequencies they might have been able to do. But this possibility of looking for a global spectral signature was first pointed out by Shaver et al., and who of course recognized that this signal level is 4 to 5 orders of magnitude below the system temperature typically, which is the total temperature of the sky as well as your system. So they are not difficult to detect in principle, if and only if the radiometer sensitivity alone were to be deciding the detectability. And of course, that is not the case, as we will see. What we are fighting against, of course, as has been appreciated in all the contexts so far, is the extragalactic, all the foregrounds, which consists of extragalactic as well as galactic. And of course, sometimes some significant contribution from the ionosphere as well. So, naively viewed across the spectrum, you will see that the foregrounds have smooth structure, and you hope to use this property to separate out the varying part from the smooth part. So the contamination is huge, and it still is a challenge which has not been fully successfully met. Early attempts to detect this were those from the Aegis again, very early on. And the system, I'm not going to go into the details of the system, but what you require is a very well calibrated system so that you know everything about all the spectral features that can result from your system, as well as from any other effects that affect your measurements. So this is a typical average spectrum you would see. And of course, there is other challenges coming from the RFI, but these are least of the worries at the present time. There have been multiple attempts. There are many, this is the one that we talked of, Aegis. There have been attempts at RRI. Some of them, HERA also began or still has hope to also address the global signal and so on and so forth. And there are other experiments which are not shown here. But the real buzz came when in 2018, there was later in Nature reporting absorption profile centered at 78 megahertz in the average sky average spectrum. And this was done with this Aegis using a fat dipole and extended ground plane and so on and so forth. And what they claimed, this figure has been shown earlier in this workshop, is this dip, a broad boxy dip absorption, which they inferred from what they saw. And then they fitted this model and showed that the residuals are now flat, and this is the system, this is the signal that will account for the signal that they have recorded. Of course, there was a flurry of theory papers discussing implications of this reported findings, underlining its importance, and also competing experiments began to take a look at their data, relook at their data, or tune their receivers to relevant spectral window. None of this is surprising, but what was surprising is the particular signature that was seen. Now, the natural question is, when such a thing is reported, is there a way of assessing this signal to be indeed from the early epochs? And that's the part I'm going to talk about. This is in the background of, it's even underlined by these kind of concerns that were immediately expressed about the unphysical nature of the profile that was fitted. And if one goes for more physically motivated modeling, then one showed that, there was the signal, the leftover stuff was only a ripple and modeling of the foreground and so on. So this is, underlines the haunting issues, inadequate calibration of the system, uncertainties in the model spectrum for the foreground, any mismatches in the system, which will lead to standing waves and spectral ripples, and of course, the RFI and so on and so forth. Of course, one can think of things like surrounding these with water bodies and so on and so forth to get rid of the ripples. And this has been suggested, and some people who took the suggestion have been working on it. So looking for a distinguishing imprint is the focus of what I'm going to say. And here I would like you to recall the dipole anisotropy in the CMB that was seen at the 3 millikelvin level. And this has been understood, or at least present consensus is that this is due to the solar system moving at typically 350 kilometers speed with respect to the CMB rest frame. Except that this is only a 0.1% effect, or part in 1,000. And so the signals that we are looking at are typically half a Kelvin at best. And so 0.1% of that is going to be very tiny. This is how the dipole anisotropy would look like in terms of the velocity, the way the line of sight velocity would vary across different directions, in shown this in array plane. So of course there will be Doppler boosting of whatever signal you're looking at the level of part in 1,000. The more important thing is there will be scaling of the spectral profile. The shift in the spectrum is proportional to the frequency itself. And so the delta nu by nu will be still tiny. It's the same order. And of course, it will depend on the direction and so on and so forth. But when you take a closer look at it, you will find that there is an amplified signature depending on the profile slope. Now, if you take a particular profile and stretch it by some amount, even if it's tiny, you will find that the places where there is variation, you will see bigger differential. And this is what leads to this surprising amplification, which is not in principle surprising, but it was not appreciated as much earlier. So in general, you will have this shift, which is given by the line of sight component. And then when you do all sky average, you will get all the versions of it as shown in this Arabic plot that I showed, and you will get effective smearing of the spectrum. How is this smearing happening? You will find the shift goes through sinusoidal. If you make a measurement in the transit mode, you will see this variation explicitly. If you take a global sky average, of course, it's a rectangular smearing, but with limited beam. And in the transit mode, you will see the smearing profile to be slightly different. So this is the result of small frequency scaling, or in addition to the shift. The apparent profile differs from the intrinsic one, and this small amount proportional to the first frequency derivative pops out. Of course, it's also proportional. Since the shift is proportional to the frequency, you will get basically frequency times the first frequency derivative of the profile as the resulting difference. So of course, sharper changes, bigger deviations. And you will find that one can now use this as a dipole scrutiny for the monopole component that one might detect. And this can be viewed very easily via the apparent diurnal variation over the local sidereal time over the 24 hours. And this periodic variation over a sidereal day can be now analyzed. When you do that, you will find here what is shown in the dotted line is a sample profile, or very similar to the one that, in fact, this is the AGES profile. And then what is shown here, 100 times blown up, is the dipole signature you would see, and that would of course change as a function of the time of the sidereal day. And this is the pattern you would expect to see. You can see that at the place where the slope is high, you have these features, and the signs are proportional to the slope. Now, this is a factor of 10 increase in this signature, which otherwise would have been ignored all along. This, you can take the other favorite profile that has been in the literature and ask what the signature you would see, and this is the signature you would see. And this is how it will vary across the 24 hours. If you use a monopole antenna, which has got wider field of view and a sort of hollow cone thing, it is looking at much wider part of the sky and averaging many versions of the shifts. And you will find that instead of 7 millikelvin features, you will smear them to almost by a factor of 2. In practice, of course, these signals will be buried under noise, and this is a simulation to show you what these spectra would typically look like. And when you average them, of course, as much as you use total integration to get the monopole profile, the same integration becomes relevant for the dipole profile. What has been done is this profile has been extracted from it as a Fourier component in this sidereal day variation. You will have the orthogonal component in the complex description of this first component in the spectral domain as a function of, which is basically the frequency of 1 upon 1 day. You can use that to compare the sort of confidence you would have in this profile. Okay.
Yes, your time is up.
I see. Okay. So I think I will probably stop here and not worry about the rest of the talk. Okay. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you for a nice talk. We have time for a couple of questions. I don't see any hands raised. Okay, Girish.
Okay, hi, thanks. Very interesting idea. So I was just trying to understand this. I mean, in pipelines where people fit these smooth polynomials, right? This dipole shouldn't affect the monopole sort of detection significance, right? So probably these analysis pipeline probably don't have to worry about this effect. Am I right in my understanding?
Yes, because I think there will be some signature, okay, in terms of the, it will be hotter in certain directions and cooler in certain directions by the amount, which is 1 part in 1,000, as you would expect. So based on what you would, which parts of the area you looked at, you will have that effect. But yes, there won't be any contamination of the dipole into the monopole.
Right. Okay. But I guess, and then on the other hand, the converse of this is basically that it is using physical, sort of the argument that we made in this Hills et al. Paper, insisting on physical models probably will run the risk that they will miss this dipole, and then probably have issues with the monopole extraction. Is that a correct interpretation?
Can you repeat that last part, please?
Well, I'm just trying to understand if the dipole contribution would lead to what Hills et al. Called unphysical spectral indices of the foreground.
Yeah, so there will be one effect, of course, because of the dipole, you will have monopole unavoidably smoothened to a certain scale.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot have features faster than something.
I see. Okay. Okay, very interesting. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Maybe we take one question and we'll move on to the next. So Prasoon, please go ahead.
Hi, Desh.
Hi.
So I was just wondering, so you said that the dipole can be a diagnostic of the monopole, but
Yes.
So recently there are these series of work by Shubhi Sarkar and collaborators who show that there is a different dipole for the quasars compared to the CMBR.
Yes.
So, I mean, if you observe a dipole, will not it be difficult to correlate it with CMBR and say this is the right dipole we have observed?
Well, yeah, in principle, we do not know if the dipole evolves over redshift. There has been a lot of controversies and debate on it. There have been indications of different dipole, as you rightly said, from various other considerations of galaxy distributions and other components in the later epochs. So in principle, if one knew about it or want to check about it, one can actually fold that in here. The dipole that we pick up can be differently directed at different redshifts or different magnitudes at different redshifts, and it will simply allow you to compute the profile you would expect as a dipole as a function of frequency.
Okay, so I think we are a little short on time, so let's move ahead to the next speaker. Indulekha, please keep your question for the discussion session. We can take it up there. Next speaker is Upala Mukhopadhyay. Can you please share your screen? Upala, are you unmuted?
Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, please share your screen.
Can you see my slides?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so at the very outset, my sincere thanks to the organizer for giving me this opportunity to present my work in this workshop. The title of my presentation is Probing Interacting Dark Energy and Scattering of Baryons with Dark Matter in Light of Age's 21 cm signal. My collaborators are Debashish Majumdar from Shah Institute of Nuclear Physics and Kanan Kumar Dotto from Presidency University. This is the reference of our work. So this is the plan of my talk. First, I will discuss the main objective or motivation of this work, and then I will very briefly discuss the formalism. Then I will show the results we have obtained, and at last I will discuss the conclusion, and maybe you have few take-home messages. So it is very well known to all of you that the 21 centimeter line arises due to the hyperfine structure of the ground state of hydrogen atom, and it is a very useful probe to understand the physics of cosmic dawn. My previous speaker has already mentioned that the AGES experiment has shown an anomaly between the theory and experimental results corresponding to this cosmic dawn era, which is probably indicating some new non-standard physics. I will come to this point later. Okay, so it is also very well known that 21 centimeter line can be observed with CMB as a background temperature, where this delta TB is attributed to the 21 centimeter signal, which is proportional to the difference of the spin temperature and the background temperature, and it also depends upon the optical depth of this gas. And what is spin temperature? This is the excitation temperature of 21 centimeter line, and which defined as the ratio of the number densities of hydrogen in their hyperfine levels. Okay, so this is a schematic diagram which shows the dependence of spin temperature on different quantities, like it depends on the CMB temperature, depends on the kinetic temperature of gas and the Lyman alpha temperature. So okay, this plot is also shown many times in this workshop. So this is the AGES experimental result. This shows an absorption feature of the 21 centimeter line around this Z is equal to 17. They show that T21, the value of absorption signal is between minus 300 millikelvin to around minus 1000 millikelvin. But according to the theoretical prediction, this T21 should not be less than minus 200 millikelvin. So this excess absorption feature is actually the anomaly between the theory and experiment, and one need some new non-standard physics to explain this excess absorption feature, and to explain either a smaller spin temperature or a larger background temperature or a larger optical depth. So in our work, we have tried to explain this excess absorption feature by considering interacting dark energy scenario, where dark energy is interacting with dark matter, and along with a dark matter and baryon interaction. And we have given some constraints on the model parameters of dark matter and interacting dark energy in this context. So this is the main motivation of our work. And now I have come to the formalism part. Here the heating term of the baryon fluid can be written as the sum of these two terms. The first term comes due to the temperature difference between the two fluids. The hotter baryon fluid transmits heat to the colder dark matter one and gradually decreases its temperature. And this second term corresponds to the velocity difference between the two fluids. Actually, the tendency to damp the relative velocity will have an heating effect on both of the fluids, and so therefore this term is proportional to this dV chi b, where this dV chi b is the dragging term to damp the relative velocity and defined in this way. Okay, so also the interaction between the dark matter and dark energy will affect the 21 centimeter absorption line. Now, if we consider this type of interaction, then the continuity equations can be given in this form, where this Q are the energy transfer between dark matter and dark energy, and rho chi and rho d are the energy densities of dark matter and dark energy. So actually this type of interaction modify the evolution of the universe, and therefore this Hubble parameter is no longer can be written in this particular form, and rho chi and rho d is no longer proportional to z in this way, that is 1 plus z cube or 1 plus z into 3 into 1 plus omega. So the optical depth which is inversely proportional to the Hubble parameter will be affected due to the modification of the evolution. Not only the optical depth but also all the quantities like the heating rate I have already shown, or all the quantities which involve rho chi, rho d or hz, or involve the evolution of the universe will be modified due to this dark matter dark energy interaction. and that will consequently affect the 21 centimeter absorption signal. So in our work, we have considered these three simple and well-studied phenomenological models. These models are already there in the literature, and these models are very well constrained from other experimental results like Planck or baryon acoustic oscillation or supernova type 1a, etc. So this in this table, I show the constraints on the model parameters of interacting dark energy from other experimental results. Sorry. Okay. So now we will investigate that whether ID model, which is well in agreement with the bounds from other experimental results, could also be consistent with the consistent in explaining the edges result or not. Okay, so I mean we have solved these equations. The first equation is for the temperature evolution of dark matter. Now this first term is for the expansion of the universe. Second term corresponds to the baryon and dark matter interaction, and the third term is for the dark matter and dark energy interaction. Similarly, for the temperature evolution of baryon, this first term is for the expansion of the universe. The last term is due to the baryon and dark matter interaction, and this term is for other heating and cooling effects. So as this TB Tchi depends upon the free electron fraction, so we have considered the evolution of the free electron fraction also, and we have also considered the variation of relative velocity. So these four equations along with these two equations, that is these 6 equations, are solved simultaneously to obtain the Tchi and TB. And it is very well known that at Z around 17, our TB or the gas temperature is identical to the spin temperature, and therefore by solving this coupled equation, we have obtained the spin temperature and thus get the brightness temperature of 21 centimeter line. Okay, so now these are our results. This shows the evolution of Hubble parameter for different interacting dark energy models for different dark matter dark energy interaction strength, this small lambda, and these blue lines correspond to the evolution of the Hubble parameter for lambda CDM case. And okay, and here we can see that if lambda is positive, then the value of Hz is less than the value of Hz for lambda CDM value, lambda CDM model. Okay, here we plot the brightness temperature of 21 centimeter line with different dark matter dark energy interaction strength, different dark matter baryon cross section, and different dark matter masses m chi. Here actually we have plotted delta T21, which is T21 minus T21 0. Okay, so here T21 0 is the 21 centimeter signal at Z around 17.2 for lambda CDM case, and this T21 is the same for the models we have chosen, that is by considering all the interacting scenarios. Okay, and here this sigma 41 is in the unit of 10 to the power minus 41 centimeter square, and these black lines, the region below these black lines or the region between these black lines, are actually showing the edges limit of delta T21. So here we see that if dark matter dark energy interaction strength is larger, then we will have a larger absorption feature, and so the discrepancy between the theory and experiment can be reduced. Similarly, if we consider sigma 41 is equal to 0, that is there is no interaction between dark matter and baryon, then the edges limits are merely satisfied. But if we consider sigma 41 is not is equal to 0, then edges limit can be satisfied. So these are plots for model 1 of interacting dark energy. This is a same plot for model 3 of interacting dark energy, where we see that the edges observations are satisfied for interaction strength greater or equal to 0.04. But from other experiments, we have seen that lambda should not be greater than this 0.000989. So whatever the values are needed for lambda to satisfy the edges limit do not corroborate with the bounds from other experiment for this model 3 case. And this same conclusion can be obtained for model 2. So these are the problems with model 2 and model 3. Okay, now we have also shown the allowed parameter space for m chi and lambda, which can satisfy the edges limit, and we can see that if lambda is larger or lambda has larger values and m chi has smaller values, then the edges limit can be satisfied in a more favorable way. And these are the allowed parameter space for sigma 41 and m chi for two different values of lambda, 0.08 and lambda equal to 0. Here this lambda is equal to 0 means there is no interaction between dark matter and dark energy. And here we see that in this case, m chi can probe up to around 3 GeV. But if we consider that there is an interaction between dark matter and dark energy, then m chi can probe up to 8 GeV. So the presence of the dark matter dark energy interaction actually increase the range of dark matter mass, which can probe the edges limit.
Upala, you have 2 more minutes.
Okay, this is my last slide. Okay, so this is actually the conclusion part. We have tried to explain the excess observational trough in the edges experiment by considering dark matter dark energy interaction and baryon dark matter interaction, and we have found these 3 major points, that is a larger dark matter baryon interaction cross section or a larger dark matter dark energy interaction parameter, and smaller dark matter masses are more favorable to achieve the excess absorption feature. Second, when model 1 of ID is considered, edges result and other experimental results are well respected, but it is not the case for the other 2 models. And third, dark matter dark energy interaction raises the probability of probing larger mass ranges of dark matter that could have influenced the cooling effect. And these 3, and that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Upala, for keeping time and a nice talk. So we have time for a couple of questions. Shantanu has a question.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe a slightly tangential to your talk, but related. So I guess in 2018, Stacy McGaugh had a paper that the edges signal is consistent with a purely baryonic universe, or a universe with only baryons and no cold dark matter. So do you have any comments about that paper on whether do you think such a model is viable? Maybe others can also chime in.
Okay. I am not very aware of that paper, but actually there are different ways to approach this edges observational problem. So maybe that is an approach, but it is an alternative approach where this excess absorption feature can be explained. Is it okay?
No. So
Okay,
I just wanted to know if you have a critique of that work, but I'll send a link to that paper in the chat.
Oh, yes. Thank you. You can send me, then I can discuss it with you. I can. Yes. Thank you.
That paper is for lower redshift, lower than maybe 2-3 redshift.
Yeah. Which paper? Sorry.
The one Shantanu is talking about.
Okay.
We'll see his. Okay, next question from Girish.
Yeah, so this was very interesting. I was just wondering naively, we know that the dark energy at these redshifts should be a negligible density. So I mean, the dark energy density should have negligible values at these redshifts, is what I mean. So is there a easy way to understand why your 3 models look that different then?
Okay, yeah, actually, what is the physical reason behind it? I cannot maybe explain that, but these three models, actually it is seen that the other two models, which is not consistent with other experiment and edges, for those models, the low L region of CMB are very tightly constrained, and therefore, actually the low L region is very significantly affected, and therefore these two models are very much tightly constrained, and that's why within that tightly constrained limit, there are no lambda values which can satisfy this edges result. But for model 1, this limit is somewhat loose, and so we can have both of these experiments can be satisfied with same lambda values.
Okay, we'll take the next question from.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted
Okay,
to,
thank you.
if it's okay, Prabha, just to respond to this Shantanu
Okay, yeah,
Desai's
please go ahead.
point.
Yes.
I mean, this Stacy McCaw's model is clearly not consistent with CMB, right? It was not clear why that paper was written. Anyway, just a small comment. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so Prashun has unraised his hand. So I think, thank you, Upala. We can move on to the next speaker,
Thank you.
Shikhar Mittal. Is Shikhar here?
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'll share my screen now. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll be talking about Lyman alpha coupling and heating at cosmic dawn. Let us start with some very basics. I'm sure this is all very familiar, but for completeness. So I'll define my global 21 centimeter signal as follows. So it is the measurement of a differential brightness temperature, which is basically 21 centimeter brightness measured against the CMB. So when we make a when we solve the radiative transfer equation, we get an equation of this form. Over here, we make the usual approximation of Rayleigh-Jeans limit, where the intensities can be written in terms of temperature. So that is why we are seeing these temperatures here. Over here, this XHI is the neutral hydrogen fraction, YP is the helium fraction by mass, omega and H are the usual cosmological parameters, Z is the redshift, T gamma is the CMB temperature, and the key quantity over here is this the spin temperature, TS. So this I'll discuss briefly next. Spin temperature quantifies the relative population of the hyperfine levels. So it is defined, the defining equation is this one, and the over here new 21 cm is the frequency corresponding to 21 centimeter line, and TS over here, this is how it enters the equation. So it can be affected by mainly two processes at cosmic dawn. First is the Einstein processes. The other is the Wauthausen field effect, which is basically the Lyman alpha photons affect its population. So I will not go through the details, but when we make a balance of all these two processes, we get an expression of this form. Over here, as I mentioned earlier, T gamma is the CMB, Tk is the gas temperature, and X alpha is the Lyman alpha coupling strength. So it basically quantifies the strength of Wauthausen field effect over the CMB photons. So just for the motivation of this work, I'll show this edges signal again. So this is the on the x-axis we have the redshift and decreasing fraction, and this is the on y-axis is the signal. And the most intriguing feature of this signal is this absorption depth, which is found to be more than double than even the most optimistic theoretical models. So based on these results, a recent literature pointed out that a strong Lyman alpha background is ruled out because of this measurement. So we like to revisit their argument. So the first thing in this problem set is to figure out the interaction of Lyman alpha photons with the neutral hydrogen atom. For that, we start with a radiative transfer equation. But the full equation in general is not always necessary, and we can make some approximation. The most common over here that works is the Fokker-Planck approximation, which is in which the equation reduces to a diffusion equation. So this first term over here, which is of second order in the intensity, it is the indicative of diffusion approximation. The second term is the recoil term, where eta is a recoil parameter which captures the effect of recoil in the hydrogen atom on collision with laminar photons. Third term over here is the expansion term, which captures the effect of Hubble expansion. Gamma s is known as the Sobolev parameter, which is proportional to the Hubble constant. And the right boundary conditions for this problem would be that it approaches a constant laminar alpha background far from the resonance line. Its calculation J alpha we'll discuss in a moment. But let us first see a typical solution of this laminar alpha spectrum. So here on the x-axis we have the non-dimensional frequency offset, and the y-axis is normalized by the background. So as it is expected, far from the resonance, which is x is equal to 0, the spectrum approaches a background, and in the middle we see the maximum absorption. An interesting feature of this this absorption is that it has an offset. It is not at symmetric about this x is equal to 0 line. This is because of the Hubble expansion, because the due to expansion, the photons redshift, and the atom would like to accept photons of higher frequency, so that it comes out to be exactly at the laminar alpha resonance. So there is a shift towards a higher frequency. So now once we have obtained our distorted spectrum, we can begin with the laminar alpha coupling. Intuitively, we should think that it is proportional to the laminar alpha background, and with more rigorous calculations, it can be put in this form. Over here, J alpha, as I mentioned earlier, is the background, and S alpha is all the distortion that has been dumped into this one factor. S is it is a non-dimensional parameter, which is of order of unity, and J naught is just some combination of fundamental constants and CMB temperature. Now let us see the mechanism of laminar alpha heating. So let us, for simplicity, consider two extreme cases. One in which the hydrogen atom is moving away from the source, and one in which it is moving towards the source. So if it is moving away, uh, the atom would like to accept photons of higher frequencies, so that in its rest frame it comes out to be exactly at the laminar alpha. So these photons will tend to speed up the atom and hence cause a heating effect. The opposite will be true in the case of this second picture, where the photons of lower frequencies are accepted, so that at the rest frame of hydrogen, they are at exactly at laminar alpha. So these will cause some cooling. In a static universe, both these effects are equally likely to happen, but in an expanding universe, this picture is slightly more dominant, and hence we have a net heating effect. So once we have obtained the heating volumetric heating rate, we can plug it into an equation of which governs the evolution of TK with time. So this is the equation that has been shown previously also. So here I have just converted the time derivatives into redshift. The first term is the adiabatic cooling term, and in this work we are just considering this laminar alpha heating. Other mechanisms such as the X-ray heating, I have not included this. So okay, so one final ingredient in the theoretical setup is the laminar alpha background, J alpha, which I have been mentioning repeatedly. So so here we assume that the laminar alpha emission follows the star formation rate, and for that we then need to estimate the star formation rate. So we can estimate it to be approximately given by the rate at which the baryons collapse in the dark matter halos, using the press sector theory of star formation. And finally, we also need to model the spectral energy distribution of the Lyman series photons. So that can be obtained from the population 2 type models, which is commonly followed from this Barkana and Loeb 2005 literature. Okay, so now all the theory is set, we would like to see what are the main questions that we would like to answer in this work. So the first thing is, what is the correct expression of Lam alpha heating rate, and does the signal measured by the edges collaboration rule out strong Lam alpha? So we'll show the results one by one. So over here, these are the two panels, and the left in the first over here, I'll show the evolution of the gas temperature. On the right, I'll show the 21 centimeter signal. Note that the x-axis is the redshift z. It is an increasing fraction, so time is in this direction, leftwards. So for comparison, in the TK plot, I have also shown the CMB temperature, which is again just 2.73 times 1 plus z. So the first example that I am showing is a very simple universe in which there is no Lyman alpha radiation, and hence there is no coupling. And obviously there is no other heating mechanism, so the TK just falls off as 1 plus z square, which is relevant for adiabatic cooling. And in the right panel, this is the 21 centimeter signal, no radiation, and hence there is no signal, so it is a flat line, it is zero, no signal is observed. But now let us switch on the Lam alpha radiation. So this green curve corresponds to our base model, which is 5 diffusion model from the Barkana and Loeb 2005 from population 2 type stars, and we have this following curves shown by green. So this, as you can see, the Lam alpha heating is very negligible in this case, and but we get an appreciable 21 centimeter signal. I would now like to compare my result with previous literature, which I'm showing here by black dash dotted line. So further, exactly the same astrophysics, we see that there's a considerable discrepancy in our results. So as you can see in their result, the Lam alpha heating predicts very high temperatures, and correspondingly the delta TB values are very low. So now the question is, why is there a difference in our results? So the answer lies in the volumetric heating rate expressions. So these are the two expressions that appear in literature, this first one and the second one. Both these expressions are correct and equivalent, and their equivalence can be established via some algebraic manipulations and the radiative transfer equation. But if you now see the expression used by the literature, Gara and Mellema, you can see that there has been some kind of a mix-up, and we can even make a numerical estimate. And when we do, we get an functional dependence of this form, and its typical value comes out to be around 100. So that is why their heating rate was quite high, and hence the significant difference in results. But now moving on, we want to see how our results change if we change our Lam alpha coupling, Lam alpha background. So as we increase the Lam alpha strength, we get more and more heating, which is evident from these curves, and correspondingly the 21 centimeter is also affected. It shifts to higher redshift, because more and more heating is there, so the signal shifts to higher redshift.
Shikha, you have 3 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. So just for completeness, I'll again show the edges result with our theoretical expectation. So it is not the purpose of this work to like explain this result. So this is just for completeness. But we can see that the strong Lam alpha background is definitely required if we are to achieve this strong absorption feature in the edges. So let us now conclude this talk. So in this work, I have modeled a 21 centimeter signal with Lam alpha coupling and heating. We have investigated various expressions of Lam alpha heating in literature. Our main conclusion is that a strong Lam alpha background is not ruled out and is in fact necessary given the edges claim, which is contrary to the conclusion of Gara and Mellema. And we have also discussed the reasons for this, identified any shortcomings in the theory. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shikhar, for keeping time and a nice talk. So we have time for questions. Okay, Atrideep has a question. Please go ahead.
Shikhar, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
So can you go to the slides where you said that Lyman alpha heating is asymmetric?
Heating, you mean the profile, absorption profile?
Yes.
Okay, this one?
This one, yeah. So I have this question that, so when you are saying that it is asymmetric because of the Hubble expansion, does not
Right.
it involve some time scale? For example, if that profile that you are showing, the Lyman alpha spectrum, it has this time scale which is smaller than the Hubble time scale, then will it get the effect of Hubble expansion?
Yes, you are right, but okay, so maybe it is just enhanced, that is why we are seeing it, but yeah, it has a small effect, and when we write the equation in terms of non-dimensional parameters, so it just washes out maybe in this expression, in these parameters. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
So maybe just to comment, Shikhar, on Atrideb's question, perhaps the correct way to understand could be that the Lyman alpha production rate is much faster, or the time scale of that is much shorter than the Hubble time scale. So you will always saturate on this distorted spectrum.
Yeah, okay.
Right, this J alpha has a there is a time scale over which the diffusion occurs, the radiation transfer time scale, which is given by the cross section of the Lyman alpha interaction, and the
Thanks,
density.
Girish, thanks.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, so next is Ankita.
Yeah. Hi. So I have two questions. First one is, can you please tell me the flux of the Lyman alpha flux order at a redshift around 15 or 10? Please mention the.
You mean, okay, so this J alpha you are asking about?
Yeah. The order of this flux.
Okay, so this flux I have quantified it in terms of number. So number per unit area per unit time, and so okay, so number I cannot give you right now. So it will be difficult to quantify this. Just
Okay, the second question is, you have considered the POC2 star formation to calculate these Lyman alpha flux.
right.
So, so what's the motivation of not considering the POC3 star formation along with the POC2?
Oh, okay. So my main purpose was to compare the previous literature results. So in their literature, population 2 stars was used, and maybe for these late redshifts, population 2 should be better than population 3 also. It is not very clear, but yeah, this is just one particular model that I'm using.
So there are no more questions, I think. Okay, thank you, Shikhar. Let us move on to the next speaker, Ankita. We are actually ahead of time, which is great. Ankita?
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah. Yes.
Just give me a moment. Okay, so my slides are visible?
Yeah.
Okay. So hello everyone, I hope all of you are safe. So I'm Ankita Bera, I'm a PhD student at Presidency University. And today I'll talk about two non-standard heating processes of the IGM during the cosmic dawn. And these works I have done in collaboration with Kanan Datta and Shomadeep Shamui. So to start with, I'll briefly mention the processes which are responsible for this cosmic history, as the previous speakers have already elaborated it. So these first absorption profile arises due to the thermal decoupling of the cosmic gas from the CMBR, and this period is known as dark ages because at that time there were no sources of light. Now once the ionizing astronomical sources started to form, they start to ionize the cosmic gas. And the Lyman alpha photons from the first stars or the first generation of galaxies, they alter the spin states of hydrogen ground state hyperfine levels. And that is the onset of this 21 centimeter absorption profile. And in the literature, it is generally considered that the X-ray emission from these galaxies hits the surrounding medium, and that leads to this 21 centimeter emission signal. But in this presentation, I'll discuss two non-standard heating processes. And non-standard in the sense that these heating processes are not generally considered in the literature during cosmic dawn, but these are not exotic. So the first one is the heating due to the cosmic ray particles. And here we are considering the cosmic ray protons, which are generated in the early universe, starting from the first metal-free stars. And there are few works on the cosmic rays, but the detailed analysis that how it affects the thermal and ionization history during cosmic dawn is not well discovered. So we try to explore that. And there are a few works in the post-EOR scenario as well, and this reference is one of them. Also, we studied the heating due to the primordial magnetic field, which originated, for instance, during inflation in our previous work, which has already been published. So to study the cosmic rays, first the questions arise are like how much cosmic ray protons are getting produced, how much energy they are getting from the supernova, and how much energy they are depositing in the IGM. So to answer all of these, first we need to model the star formation rate. And for that, we have considered the metal-free POP3 star formation inside mini halos. And then it makes the transition to POP2 star formation. And the reason to consider the mini halos is that if we consider the halos of mass greater than 10 to the power 7 or 8 solar mass, then the progenitor POP3 star will not be able to photo-evaporate the gas from the halo. And the supernova will explode in a dense environment. And as a result, the thermal energy of the supernova remnant will be radiated away, and the SNR will fade away within a few parsec of its origin. Now, there are several works that demonstrated that the supernova associated with POP3 stars could readily escape from their host mini halos into the surrounding IGM. And a significant fraction of the supernova kinetic energy will be put into the cosmic rays escaping into the IGM. So in our model, these epsilon, ESN, and FSN are the free parameters, where FSN is the number of supernova explosions, ESN is the energy released from a single supernova, and epsilon is the fraction of this supernova kinetic energy that is being utilized to accelerate the cosmic ray protons. And these metal-free POP3 stars are considered to form in isolation in mini halos, which we have taken into account in this function m.sa. And in our model, we have chosen the Shed-Thurman mass function to calculate this SFR. These first stars formed in molecular clouds that were cooled by the molecular hydrogen rather than the metal line cooling that occurs in star forming regions today. And to make that happen, we need this criteria: FH2 should be greater than F critical H2. Now, in this expression, this T is the virial temperature of the halo. And once it is satisfied, the molecular hydrogen cooling will become efficient enough to cool the gas into the first star-forming molecular clouds. And these occurs in very small halos at the highest redshift, which is redshift 50 in our model. So after the first generation of stars form, it produces a background of Lyman-Warner radiation. And the Lyman-Warner band consists of photons in the energy range of 11.5 to 13.6 electron volt, which can photodissociate the molecular hydrogen in hydrogen. So if a halo is present in a high enough background of Lyman-Warner photons, it can lose all of its molecular hydrogen, and then it will not be able to cool the gas in star-forming regions. So a self-consistent calculation is required to determine the minimum mass of POP3 halos, and that we calculated using this expression, this Lyman-Warner flux, where this epsilon is the specific Lyman-Warner co-moving luminosity density, and it can be calculated from the star formation rate. So with this, we get these results for the Lyman-Warner flux and the minimum and the maximum mass to calculate the star formation, where these maximum mass we are getting from the molecular cooling cutoff, which is 10 to the power 4 Kelvin. And for minimum mass, this green one we are getting from the virial mass calculation, and the red one we are getting from the Lyman-Warner calculation. And at a redshift, which mass is greater, we are taking that mass to be minimum mass at that redshift. So once a halo reaches the virial temperature of 10 to the power 4 Kelvin, the atomic cooling begins to dominate, and it makes a transition from metal-free POP3 star formation to metal-enriched POP2 star formation. And POP2 star formation is quite well constrained in the sense of POP3, and that we have taken from Samui et al. 2007. And we find that POP2 and POP3 actually coexist over a cosmological time scale, and POP2 SFRD starts to dominate strongly before the POP3 star formation finally ends. So after getting the total SFR, we compute the average rate of cosmic rays which are generated in star forming regions using the cosmic ray proton spectrum. So unlike UV photons, in the case of cosmic ray protons, we have the liberty to consider the particles that are generated at a redshift, at a particular redshift, and also the particles which are coming from higher redshift as well. So along with the injected spectra, we have also taken into account the evolved spectra, which is shown here. These straight line are for the injected spectra, and the curved ones are the injected plus evolved spectra. And as these cosmic ray particles propagate first within the high redshift star forming galaxies and then into the IGM, its velocity gets changed due to the collision with free electron, the ionization of neutral hydrogen, and the adiabatic expansion of the universe. And as these propagate, they gradually lose their energy by ionizing and exciting the hydrogen and helium atoms, thus heating the ambient gas, which we can see from this graph. Okay. So here in this gamma CR, this is the rate of energy which is going into the IGM. And here we have taken into account the secondary ionization, the helium abundance, the contribution from heavy CR nuclei, etc., etc. And from here we can see that, and for this plot we have taken this set of parameters. And from here we can see that the cosmic ray heating is quite a promising heating process during the cosmic dawn. So they also studied the heating due to the primordial magnetic field, and there are two processes through which the magnetic energy goes into the IGM, the ambipolar diffusion mechanism and the decaying magnetohydrodynamic turbulence. Now, in presence of tangled magnetic field, the Lorentz force acts on the ionized component of the medium, which generates a velocity difference between the ionized and neutral components. And this relative velocity gets damped due to the ion-neutral collision, which leads to the dissipation of magnetic energy by this process. Now, the another process is decaying turbulence. Now, what is happening that after recombination, the radiative viscosity of the medium decreases drastically. So the Reynolds number for the fluid motion becomes very large, which induce this turbulence in the medium, and the energy gets dissipated by this process. And if we apply these energy rates to the temperature evolution equation, then we see that even if we consider the magnetic field of 0.03 nanogauss, we start to see some significant changes in the temperature. And as the ambipolar diffusion is inversely proportional to the square of the baryon density, it is mainly dominated at the lower redshift, whereas the decaying turbulence it is proportional to the Hubble rate and the magnetic energy density, which again proportional to 1 plus z to the power 4. So it is mainly dominant at high redshift. And from here, we get an upper bound on the magnetic field as 0.1 nanogauss in the standard scenario. Now, this is the very well-known observation right now, the Aegis observation. Now, Desh has already explained it in detail, so I'm skipping that part. So, these are the best fit values for the model they have taken for this absorption profile. Now, the issues here are the shape and the size of the profile. The shape is supposed to be a Gaussian one, but the observed one is U-shape or the flattened Gaussian. And the size is almost 2 times larger than the strongest prediction. So to explain these absorption, we need either excess radio background or polar IGM background. And here we have considered the polar IGM background. And for that, we have considered the dark matter baryonic interaction, where the interaction is like Rutherford-like interaction, and the interaction cross-section varies with the relative velocity as b to the power minus 4. Now there are two effects mentioned by Uppala as well. So the cooling effect comes from the temperature difference between the two fluids, as the dark matter temperature is colder in our case, so it helps to cool the IGM temperature. And as these fluids have different velocity, there will be a friction between them. So both the fluids will get heated up irrespective of their own temperature. Now, if we consider the combined effect of dark matter and the magnetic field, and if we keep in mind the Aegis bound that T21 should be within minus 0.3 Kelvin to minus 1 Kelvin, we can allow or discard some of these combinations of dark matter mass, cross-section, and the magnetic field. And from here, we can actually allow 0.4 nanogauss magnetic field for certain combinations of dark matter mass and cross-section, which is completely ruled out in the standard scenario. Now, if we look at this green card, there is a plateau-like region. So what is happening here is the heating due to the magnetic field and the cooling effect due to the dark matter baryonic interaction, they are compensating each other up to a certain redshift. But at lower redshift, due to the decaying of magnetic field, the IGM temperature is mainly governed by the dark matter baryonic interaction, and it's getting lowered. So the primordial magnetic field is not able to explain the heating of the Aegis profile.
Ankita, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Whereas if we consider the cosmic ray heating along with the dark matter baryonic interaction, here for this plot, we have taken these set of parameters, but we need to explore the entire range of parameters to get the best fit result. But, and here we haven't considered the Lyman alpha coupling as well. But from here, one thing we can say that the cosmic ray heating, it is also a promising heating process to explain the Aegis result. So to summarize, we get an upper bound on the magnetic field as 0.4 nanogauss in the colder IGM background, which is completely ruled out in the standard scenario. But due to the decaying of magnetic field, due to the ambipolar diffusion and decaying turbulence mechanism at low redshift, it is unable to explain the heating during cosmic dawn. But if we consider the cosmic ray heating, it's quite a potential source of heating in addition with X-rays at cosmic dawn, which is neglected. So from Aegis or from other future observations, we can actually constrain the SFRD or the physics of POP3 stars in many halos, which is not well constrained yet. So with this, I end here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ankita, for a nice talk. So Girish has a question. Girish, please go ahead.
Yes, yeah, this was very nice. Thank you. I was just trying to understand why there is an absorption feature at all in your cosmic ray heating model, because I guess Lyman alpha production and the cosmic ray production will happen on the same time scale. So you should start heating the gas already at the point where the absorption feature starts to form, no?
This one?
Yeah, in general, I'm not sure I understood this particular plot, but in general, I'm saying typically what happens is that there is an absorption feature because you have Lyman alpha photon production from these stars. But now what will happen in your model is that the Lyman alpha photon production and the cosmic ray production will happen together. So the Lyman alpha coupling will no longer be able to produce an absorption feature. Is my understanding correct?
So here we haven't considered the Lyman alpha, and these excess absorption is occurring due to the dark matter baryonic interaction. So otherwise we will not get this absorption. So here the absorption is occurring mainly due to the dark matter baryonic interaction, this excess absorption.
Okay,
And
great.
Lyman
Thank you.
alpha we
Yeah.
haven't incorporated yet, but we are trying to incorporate that. So only after incorporating that I can comment on that.
Okay.
Prabha, may I comment?
Yes, please do.
This question?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is actually what happens that you know that you need only little amount of Lyman alpha to couple the spin temperature with the gas temperature, but to become heating to be significant, you have to wait. So although the cosmic ray started to produce at redshift, let's say 25 or before, but only at around 18 or redshift 18 or below, it becomes important. Before, the amount of heating is very negligible. That's what we have seen.
I see. Okay, great.
It depends on the model parameter. You can also, if you tune your model parameter, you can also hit your IGM at higher redshift. But for reasonable parameter value, you can actually tune it.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you. It might be interesting to look at the power spectrum for this using for Nenufar or something to constrain cosmic ray heating. Yeah, great. Thanks.
Okay. Next question, Atridev.
Hey, Ankita. So I have one question. So for example, when you are considering the Lyman-Warner background, in that equation, there is a term of SFRD, right?
Yeah.
So that means these two equations are coupled, like this JLW, and when you are considering epsilon Z prime, you need to consider the mass low, M low, right?
Yeah.
So how do you consider, how do you take into account this coupling? Do you solve this equation simultaneously?
Yeah, we solve this simultaneously, but for highest redshift, we are considering the minimum mass to be the virial mass. And as you get the Lyman alpha flux at the highest redshift, then you can apply that flux to SFRD, and then it will go on. Then you can consider the Lyman-Warner and the virial mass to calculate the minimum mass. So for the highest one, you need to consider the virial mass at the minimum mass.
And how do you, will you tell it again, how do you consider the POP3 to POP2 transition?
So for POP3, we are considering the Lyman-Warner, etc., and for POP2, we are taking this not simultaneously. We have taken POP3 and how it can contribute to heating and ionization. That's a different formalism. And then we are adding the POP2 heating process along with the POP3. So it will automatically take the transition.
No, I understand that. I was trying to understand the SFRD. For example, when you go from POP3 SFRD to POP2 SFRD, how do you go from POP3 to POP2? Like, for example, at certain redshift, you will have only POP3, right? And then it will, like with time, it will go from POP3 to POP2. How do you take that transition? For example, in this plot, yeah. So there is this, please go ahead.
Continue. Okay, so what we are doing that up to, we are considering the POP3 star formation and its contribution to IGM through these processes, this heating and ionization, and we are adding these to temperature evolution equation, and with this we are also adding the POP2 contribution to the heating.
Okay.
So whenever the SFRD is greater than the POP3, or when the SFRD, the POP2 SFRD is dominating, then automatically that effect will start to dominate in the IGM. So we are just adding this contribution separately.
Okay.
And whichever is dominating at that red sheet, that will dominate the heating in the IGM as well.
No, actually, my concern was that, for example, in your recipient 0 to 10, you can see there are some contribution from pop. No, sorry. No, I got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
So if anything,
If you have more discussion, we can take it to the discussion. Okay, we'll take the last question from Shikhar.
Yes, can you show the last plot, the absorption feature in your 21 centimeter signal?
yeah.
So here you are writing no laminar alpha coupling. So I want to know that is it exactly 0 or is it there is some other approximation?
So we have considered the spin temperature to be coupled to the, it's more or less equal to the IGM temperature. But if you
Yeah,
consider
so
laminar alpha coupling, then it will not be the same. So that we haven't considered. We have considered the spin temperature to be equal to the IGM temperature.
okay, but it should be probably more. But yeah, so how does that happen? But there needs to be some mechanism, right? If you write no laminar alpha coupling, it would be contradictory, right?
Yeah, I mean, till now we haven't incorporated it, but we are actually doing that right now. So
Okay,
we will
so
take these two things together, the cosmic ray heating and the laminar alpha coupling. But for these plot, we haven't taken into account, and so that's why I have shown you.
okay, cool.
It will
Yeah,
present.
I think
Theoretically,
Shikhar, you are right. I mean, it is not appropriate to write no laminar alpha coupling. Actually, it is fully coupled.
Yes, that is what I was.
That would be the appropriate thing to write. Yeah.
Yes, it's a very strong laminar alpha coupling actually.
Yes, yeah, fully coupled. Yes.
Okay, so no more questions. So we come to the close of the first session. Let's thank all the speakers for excellent work and talk. So I hand it over to